Okay, looking at our next one, right? Center that up, turn it to 24. All right, so PowerPoint 8, plyometric training concepts of all right, let's get the reactive stuff going, right? So we're going to talk about plyometrics here. Big explosive movements, obviously a huge part of sports, right? For training an athlete, plyometric training is absolutely vital, absolutely key. So what is a plyometric? What is a plyometric / reactive exercise? So plyometrics or reactive exercises are quick, powerful movements that involve a rapid eccentric contraction followed immediately by an explosive concentric contraction, right? So plyometrics always have to start with a super explosive eccentric contraction, right? There will always be a lot of like eccentric strength in our explosive movements. You have to have explosive lengthening in order to have explosive shortening. You know, you have to have explosive loading in order to have explosive unloading. And so they are always going to be accomplished by these big, what we call stretch shortening cycles, right? So a stretch shortening cycle, which I mentioned is going to be a really big, important concept, right? Actually, am I going to get a definition? No. So a stretch shortening cycle is a rapid eccentric contraction that causes a rapid concentric one, right? So it is rapid eccentric lengthening triggers and a rapid concentric shortening, right? So that is a simple reflex. It is an example of a stretch reflex, which is a spinal reflex and a simple reflex. That's the big thing to remember here. So if we look at a stretch reflex, right? Here's the classic example of a stretch reflex. They always talk about this version here, right? You go to the doctor, they got that stupid little hammer, and they kick you. They hit you on the patellar tendon, right? So what will happen is your muscle spindle will sense. This is a great chart. This makes my life super easy. Look at this. So what happens is like you hit somebody in the knee right here on that patellar tendon, right? So remember your quadricep runs down over top of your kneecap and then inserts on your tibia right there. And so you hit it just under that kneecap on this little fleshy bit right here. And what that does is it kind of tricks your body into thinking that you just bent your knee super, super far. Like when you take this hammer and you hit it here, the muscle spindle will sense an immediate, like really intense stretch. So then sensory neurons will conduct an action potential, which will trigger up your nervous system, and then it will travel like to your spine. So it would actually travel this way and the spine, but the chart's going this way. So it's going to travel over here, and then those sensory neurons will get with your nervous system, which will then travel up to the brain. But because this is such an intense thing, right? Because this is like a really intense reaction, your nervous system, it probably will not actually reach your brain. What will happen instead are these alpha motor neurons, which are located in the spine here, will contract they're motor neurons, right? They are designed to contract muscles to move things. So what's going to happen is one signal is going to travel to the quadricep and another signal is going to travel to the hamstring. We want this muscle to contract, so that's going to travel this way to turn this muscle on. Meanwhile, the same signal is going to diverge and then travel down here to the hamstring to cause this to relax. So like your antagonist lets go and your agonist contracts, right? And all of that is because your nervous system thinks when you hit it with that hammer, it thinks that you went into this position here, but not just like this position here, like that position. Like it thinks that you just ripped your, ankle all the way past and just crazy stretched out this muscle, right? Now, obviously that didn't actually happen, but the muscle spindle thinks it did. So the muscle spindle went, whoa, no. And then the nervous system tried to protect that muscle and contract. It contracts the quadricep muscle, shortening it, therefore pulling in the opposite direction, and inhibited the hamstring muscle, therefore relaxing it to allow for that contraction to happen. So basically, it thinks that you're going like this and this and this and this and this. So then it says, okay, let this muscle go because that's what's pulling it this way, and turn this muscle on so that the leg goes like that. And that's why when you hit somebody in that tendon, right, and you go like this, right, your knee will kick forward. I definitely cheated right there. I missed. I can never actually hit the freaking thing. But that is a stretch reflex, right? It's a simple spinal reflex. And we take advantage of it all the time. You can do this with anything, right? If I stand here and if I go like this, start swinging my leg like this, right? My hamstring is being pulled into this big, deep stretch. So it naturally wants to pull back this way, right? Meanwhile, if I pull really far this way, now my hip flexor is being super stretched. It wants to pull back this way. So when I'm doing dynamic stretches, sometimes of which are what we call ballistic stretches. Ballistic stretches are those big kind of explosive stretches like this. If I go like this, right, what's happening is I'm actually telling my hamstring to contract to pull back down. So is this actually helping my hamstring mobility? No. In fact, technically, it's making it worse, right? Because I'm creating stretch reflexes. Now, that's okay, right? That's actually fine if I create those stretch reflexes and I do sort of turn that muscle on, but it's definitely not a tool that I want to use if I'm trying to make someone more flexible, right? That's why we have static stretches. We have static stretches to make somebody more flexible. We have dynamic stretches to turn their muscles on, which is what we want to do in the power phase, right? So dynamic stretches make perfect sense when we're trying to be explosive. Plyometric movements makes perfect sense once we're warmed up and ready to jump. But they make no sense to do, it makes no sense to do your static stretches like this, which is what we often see, right? We see people who will like bend and they'll stretch and then they do this kind of thing. They do that like bouncing thing. It's like that bouncing is not helping you stretch, right? Like don't bounce at the end range of motion. All that does is create stretch reflexes, which makes you less flexible in the end. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Cool. So we take advantage of this. We love this, by the way. We like the stretch reflex. We don't like it for people who do it wrong and make themselves less mobile, but we love it for situations where we are trying to jump more explosively. I always pull up these videos, but I love showing videos of like NFL combine high jump. It's just such a great example of where you see people do a stretch reflex in order to get like a more explosive jump. Mute. So what you'll see people do is see like the big spring, right? Like they'll throw their arms down over and over. One, right? They do that big throw. They kind of cut to it before, right? They throw their arms down. That creates a rapid stretch, right? By throwing their arms down. And there's a really good one, right? 1, 2, and then boom, he's super explosive. Who is this? Kill Harry. That's awesome. 10 foot too. Oh, come on, go back. He was the like That's such a great example. So you can see like being super explosive down, that rapidly stretches those muscles, and then a super explosive jump in the opposite direction. Um, Now, obviously, like if you are brand new to this stuff, and you are, Damien Harris, if you are brand new to this stuff and you are learning like how to do like these big jumps, there's a lot of form that goes into it as well. Like you're not just going to instantly be the world's greatest high jumper or the world's greatest long jumper by doing a stretch reflex, because who knows, you might drop yourself too low in your squat. That's a really common mistake people make, and that will reduce your power. But you know, by training for it and teaching your body to get used to those rapid eccentric contractions, it will result in much more explosive concentric contractions in the opposite direction. So this is what we're seeing. We're seeing eccentric force reduction followed immediately by concentric force production, right? You're reducing force in order to produce force. In order to do this though, notice here, you have to have proper neuromuscular stabilization. You have to have proper like control over your nervous system, which means, again, don't skip your balance training, right? Like they're two sides of the same coin. Your explosive plyometric movements require good balance, and they require good core stabilization, which is why when you have like a beginning client, maybe you don't do reactive exercises until you have developed good core strength and good balance. Once you have those things, then you can incorporate them. I know we make you practice them a lot at Sochi. We do a lot of reactive exercise training at Sochi. The reason for that is because, like, you know, most of the individuals at, you know, in the PFT program have exercised plenty. And so we know you guys can do it. But you might have like a client who just isn't ready for plyometrics in the beginning. Probably not true if you're training like an athlete, but definitely something to consider. So plyometric training is great because it will enhance like your motor learning. Remember, motor learning is like your body's ability to learn functional movement patterns. Well, this is a very unique type of stimulus, so it can train your nervous system to do those movements. It could make you a better squatter because you will learn how to eccentrically decelerate properly. It will also improve your neuromuscular efficiency. You will learn how to recruit the right muscles at the right time. And here's one of my favorite ones. It will promote muscle excitability, sensitivity, and reactivity. So one thing that's really important about plyometrics is that it will actually teach you how to respond to ground reaction forces, right? So it enhances motor learning, neuromuscular efficiency, and promotes muscle excitability, sensitivity, and reactivity. Right? So plyometric, what we're saying there is that plyometric training enhances your body's ability to respond to ground reaction forces, right? The second you hit the ground, your body knows how to recruit. I normally do an example of this in class. I'm trying to figure out how I can do this. But basically think of this as ground reaction, right? God dang it. Oh, you know what I can do? All right, this will be a little weird, but I can turn. Hold together, camera. Oh God, come on, stay put. This thing does not do angles. It's either straight on or not at all. I need a thing. All right, well, I can't get it over there. But let's say you slip off of something, right? Let's say you're standing on something and you slip and you have to fall, right? What happens, like the minute you trip over something or the minute you start falling off of something, your body realizes that it's not on the ground anymore, right? And so what it does is it instinctively, you will notice, it will instantly point your toes downwards. Your toes will start pointing because those should be the first point of contact. Now what's going to happen is the second you hit the ground, your body will then send a signal, say like, we've touched the ground, we've made contact, right? So then it will recruit the muscles in your foot. It will recruit the muscles in your quads, hamstrings, calves, and glutes. It'll tighten your core. All of those things will happen simultaneously the second you hit the ground, right? So that is a big part of why I like to call it reactive training. Like, I like the term plyometrics, but I love calling it reactive training in particular, because it really is all about how your body can react to something, right? The second something starts coming one way, you can reduce that force and maybe then push it in the opposite direction, or maybe you just reduce that force and maintain your stability. But either way, you are enhancing your body's ability to react to an external stimulus, right? Such as falling or whatever. This is like your ability to know how to tuck and roll, you know? So plyometric training enhances the other nice thing is that it also enhances these four concepts is here as well. Rate of force reduction, which is AKA power, right? So it does enhance your rate of force production through three main concepts here, which we will talk more about when we get to resistance. But it's going to enhance motor unit recruitment. So the more explosive of a movement you are doing, the more motor neurons your body will recruit in order to do a particular movement. It will also enhance what is called rate coding, which is motor unit firing rate. So it will actually send the signal much more quickly and much more explosively, and it will enhance motor unit synchronization. So remember back in our last class when we were talking about the nervous system, and we were talking about how your nervous system is kind of like, it's like a singular button, right? Every signal that you have is just a signal like this, right? That determines like how strong of a signal you are recruiting. Your body can't do something like this, right? It doesn't have the ability, like if I need to make a strong contraction, I can't just like make a louder signal to create a contraction. My nervous system works on one tone. It's like beep, 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 beep. It's no louder, it's no quieter, it's always the same volume, always the same level of signal every single time. So what makes a difference between like a strong contraction and a weak contraction is how fast those signals are traveling. So beep, 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 beep is very different from beep, 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 right? The volume is the same, right? The level's the same. Like, that's a strong contraction. That's a weak contraction, right? It's the world's simplest app. It's one button, you know? But how fast you are sending that signal determines like how powerful a contraction. Or let's say I've got two signals happening simultaneously, right? Both again are exactly the same volume, but because there's two of them, my contraction is twice as powerful. So the way that we have a difference between like picking up your cat and deadlifting your max weight is how many motor units you're recruiting, right? Multiple or just the one, you know, multiple or very few, how fast the signal is traveling. And then one of the other things that creates like a strong contraction is, are those signals, yeah, absolutely, Deborah. We'll see you. We'll see you later. Good luck with everything. The other thing that makes a strong contraction is how in sync those signals are. If they're in sync, that's a very strong signal. But if they are out of whack a little bit, it's not very efficient, right? Again, it's kind of like a tug of war. If one person is not pulling as hard, pulling super hard at the same time as somebody else, they are both out of sync with each other, you're losing overall power. So the things that create like lots of power are recruitment, speed, and synchronization. Plyometric training enhances all those things. So we are going to be looking at that when we get to the power phase of training. We'll come back to that concept because that also happens in max strength as well. So plyometric training is obviously incredibly applicable to sports, right? Like athletics are all about like both people are doing the same thing, but whoever does it faster is usually the one who's going to win, right? And so all of the movements in most athletics are your body responding to something. They're a series of stretch shortening cycles, right? They're a series of those, rapid eccentric followed by rapid concentric. Look at the NFL. You don't see an NFL quarterback. This would be so goofy if they did. You don't see them hold the ball here getting ready to throw it, right? Like that is an isometric contraction. You notice them hold it at their center, and then they do this. They bring it up to their ear, and then they whip it, right? They're like eccentric, concentric. Lengthen, shorten, right? Same thing with a baseball player. The reason they go through that whole freaking thing. There's my classic problem that I used to get yelled at. That was a sidearm. Over the top, Brad. I can hear my coach right now. But the whole reason like you do like those big explosive movements is because that's actually priming your muscles to more explosively throw in a second. Basketball, same concept, right? Sometimes it is actually, you can get more explosive when you are juking in one direction in order to bounce in the other direction, right? Or sometimes, like, how many of you guys see somebody who's going off for a sprint and they do that big, like, I just about ate it in my socks, but they do that like little tiny like half hop and then they like explode afterwards. That little half hop, when you land, it creates a rapid lengthening, which gives you a more explosive takeoff afterwards.
Hey, Brad, it's kind of like, when in the movies, when like people are jumping from rooftop to rooftop and they need to get more distance, so they like
they do a little run back. Yeah, absolutely. That definitely is giving them like the momentum necessary to travel further. A stretch reflex is the same thing. You are loading. You have to load in order to be able to unload. Plyometric training, obviously going to be great when you are training for very specific movement patterns. So this gets, talking about plyometrics, this gets very phase 6-y. This is where we really do talk a lot about like what is applicable to your sport in particular, because every sport's going to have different types of like directional changes. So there are 3 phases to a plyometric. 3 phases, I shouldn't say contraction, to plyometric exercises, right? So the 3 phases are going to be the loading phase, right? This triggers that stretch shortening cycle. Then you're going to have amortization, right? That's the transition phase. Eccentric, which is the loading. Amortization, which is the transition. So we want this to be as short as possible. So we're going to put a little note there. We want amortization to be as short as possible, because the shorter it is, the more explosive we will be during the unloading phase. Right, so actually, let's go into the eccentric phase. We'll give a little note there as well. So the eccentric phase triggers a stretch reflex due to the rapid lengthening of the muscle, right? So when you do that eccentric stretch, it will trigger a contraction in the opposite direction. It triggers that stretch reflex, right? That's why we want amortization to be so short, because like we have that contraction happening, but the longer you sit in that like lengthened position, the more your body gets used to it. You can experience this in a much slower way if you wanted to. You can actually experience this in sort of a modified way. Just sit yourself into a super low squat. There's a friggin' internet challenge running around all about this right now, where people are just sitting. I think it's like the 10-minute squat challenge. It's like, can you sit in like a low squat for like 10 minutes? And it's like, at first, your body's like, oh my God, get me out of this. It's trying to like contract and pull you the opposite way because it's like, no, 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 I'm being lengthened. No, God, stretch, contract. You know, like it's trying to pull you the opposite way. But the longer you sit in it, the more your body starts to relax and get used to that position. So that's obviously a very extreme example, but the same thing is happening here. We want, after that lengthening happens, we want to immediately reap the benefits and contract during the shortening that is going to occur, which is why we want amortization to be so short. We do not want to sit in the isometric. We don't want to sit in that transition phase. We'll lose power. So that leads us to concentric, which is the unloading, right? Whoa, what? Add a second D there, that wasn't me. This is going to be the concentric contraction that occurs due to stretch reflex. Right? So once you have that stretch reflex, your body naturally wants to spring in the opposite direction. So obviously, this is all due to proprioception. Again, welcome back to muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs, right? So your muscle spindles freak out, and the Golgi tendon organs are really along for the ride as well. Like they're like, yeah, tension, scary, you know. Both of these things kind of create that concentric contraction in order, and it's all a protective mechanism, you know, like all of that's to ensure that your muscle doesn't tear. So there's definitely like the proprioceptive relationship there, but there's also like just the elastic properties of your muscle. You got to remember that your muscles are, you know, all of these little bundles of bundles of bundles. They're these little fascicles, right? So they are very much like a rubber band. They're a series of like little bits that are all glued together. So when you pull them, they naturally want to spring back in that opposite direction. But the longer you hold them, the more they get used to being stretched out. Kind of like a rubber band. You know, if you leave a rubber band on something for a really long time, it loses its elasticity, you know, or it's like a sock that's all stretched out. It's like, I'm not even a sock anymore. I'm just an empty sack for you to put marbles in or something. So that's, you know, we want to, you know, keep that lengthening and as short as possible because that enhances that explosive nature. And then so we're going to see that here. Faster loading equals greater force. Faster eccentric contractions result in more explosive concentric contractions. So it will enhance your muscle spindle activity. It will actually turn the muscles on and make them more explosive. Again, you want to get your glutes turned on? Go do some jumping. Your glutes will actively, naturally, they will activate. But they will activate a lot better if you rapidly eccentrically load, which is why, like, with beginning clients, I don't really care about how high they can actually jump if we're doing like reactive stabilization, like we're in phase 1, I'm doing reactive exercises. The goal of phase 1 is not even necessarily to enhance your jumping ability. The goal of phase 1 is really just to work on your landing mechanics, right? But if I've trained somebody and I've worked on their landing mechanics, they're an advanced athlete, they've been training with me for a while. You know, with your average client, I'd have them do a squat jump to stabilization like this. Nothing too crazy. But if they were like an advanced client, I would have them do explosive in both directions. I would totally care about how high they're actually jumping and make them be super explosive down and up. So we would go here. I'd really start with like high arms, and I would say, I want you to throw your arms into the ground. So it would look much more like this. So they are explosive in both directions. Now, again, I got to make sure that my client has the ability to rapidly eccentrically lengthen. Otherwise, when they do that super explosive lengthening motion, they could tear or pull a muscle, right? So I do want to make sure that my athlete can actually handle this. But that is going to, you know, faster loading equals greater force. And if that's what I'm training for, that's how I'm going to train it, right? It will also desensitize your Golgi tendon organ. Remember, the Golgi tendon organ inhibits the muscle spindle. We don't want that inhibition to happen, right? We want it to be tense and explosive. Obviously, plyometric training enhances your neuromuscular efficiency, kind of like we already talked about, right? You get better control of your agonist and synergist muscles. Your nervous system learns how to respond to things even better. That's really the big goal here. So when it comes down to it, again, we're back into the same thing that we always get back into. Plyometric training should obviously be very integrated. It should train in conjunction with whatever sport you are training. So we're not training something just in isolation. We are not only focusing on like a single box jump, you know, like that's good, but that's like, what do box jumps make you better at? Box jumps, you know? If I'm training an athlete and I'm trying to get them to like jump over, like let's say it's like football or something, and I'm trying to get them to like enhance their ability to jump and, you know, get over a tackle or something. Well, then I'm going to train for that particular type of movement. I'm probably, instead of just having them do a box jump, I'm probably going to have them do multiple jumps in a row so that they can develop like that explosive, like land on the ground, explode back up mentality. Plyometric training, by the way, has been shown to be safe for young athletes as well, and it does consistently reduce injury rates. I know that it's a high risk type of exercise, and so a lot of people are like, oh, well, you know, training like that's going to get me hurt. Again, as long as you are training properly and you're you know, being systematic and progressive, teach the landing mechanics first, teach the full range of motion second, teach the explosive nature third, stabilization, strength, power, right? As long as you're doing that, it's a very safe way to train. So we do need to be aware that yes, it is an advanced training tool, and you shouldn't do it without proper core strength and proper balance, but it will actually reduce your risk for injury as long as you are training for it. Make sure that you are also monitoring your foot contact. This is kind of an interesting one, but when it comes to plyometric training, make sure that like you're keeping an eye on how much you are doing it. A common mistake that most coaches make when they're first starting is they just do like plyometric after plyometric after plyometric, and it's like, you know, this is very intense training, and the nervous system eventually just gets worn out and can't recruit anymore. And I know some people on this call right now, you guys have been in athletics before. Those of you who have played sports before, you know, your brain is worn out after practice. You know, your nervous system literally gets worn out from doing this explosive stuff. So make sure you're monitoring your volume of contact there, because you don't want to end up with like a stress fracture or, you know, altered neuromuscular control because their brain is just worn out by the end of practice, and then all of a sudden they sprain their ankle. For the most part, by the way, you don't have to think too much about it as long as you are following your acute variables. All of that work is done for you, right? This is why we only do 5 to 8 reps in stabilization. And speaking of stabilization, let's go ahead and look at the program design stuff. All right, so we'll say plyometric training program design variables. In the stabilization level, right, you are going to be choosing reactive stabilization exercises or plyometric stabilization exercises. These are exercises that focus on landing mechanics and involve, there it is again, little to no movement upon landing. So again, core stabilization, little to no movement of the spine. Balance stabilization, little to no movement of the balanced leg. Reactive stabilization obviously has to be explosive, but once you land, little to no movement. It is all about stabilizing. It's all about holding in place. Our examples are the box jump to stabilization, right? And that can be a multiplanar box hump to stabilization, right? Like she's doing, that's the sagittal version, right? She's jumping straight forward. Here's the frontal version, right? She could also do the transverse version if she was facing this way and then she turned to face that way when she landed. That would be the transverse version. All of those are good. That's if you do all of them in one workout, we call that the multiplanar box jump to stabilization. But that's a really good one. We could also do like a tuck jump to stabilization, right? Or just a squat jump to stabilization, or a box jump down to stabilization. Anything where you are holding your landing 3 to 5 seconds. That's going to be a reactive stabilization exercise. So then we have got in the strength level, right? Level 2, phases 2, 3, 4. So these exercise selections are going to be reactive strength exercises, which are exercises that involve a full dynamic, eccentric, and concentric range of motion at a repeating tempo. Oh my God. So this involves a full range of motion and must be done at a repeating tempo. This is actually you introducing the concept of like rapid eccentric lengthening, right? So if I were doing squat jumps, where I literally do it at a repeating tempo like this, where I'm like, right? That landing causes me to want to spring up into my next rep. So like I do one, which leads me into the next, which leads me into the next. That is a repeating tempo. So that's a repeat squat jump. I could do a repeat tuck jump. I could do lunge jumps here. Any of those are all really, really good examples. Whoops. Wah. So exercise examples. Repeat squat jumps, or split lunges, which is I think what they call it instead of lunge jumps in your book. Both those are really, really good examples. And then we've got our plyometric power. So these are like the full-on, super explosive, as fast as possible. So phase 5, exercise selection. These are going to be reactive power exercises. So there's not a huge difference between reactive power and reactive strength exercises, right? There's not a huge difference here, except for the fact that like they must be as explosive as possible, and they must involve like maximal rate of force production. So these are reactive exercises that are performed as fast as possible. So this is literally as explosive as it gets. Really, the example here, a really good one is it has to force you into rapid eccentric deceleration. I'm actually going to put that, I'm going to put that little extra note in here. The body must be forced into rapid eccentric deceleration. So you have to move really explosively in the eccentric direction in order for this to be effective. So let me kind of zoom in here. You can see the depth jump. He's starting on top of the box, and then as he goes down, that forces him into rapid eccentric deceleration, and then he explodes back up again afterwards. That's one rep. So down and then back up, right? The same thing could be done for like a depth jump to long jump. That's a really good example as well. So he's going to start here, down, and then leap forward. She's going to do a third example, which is a depth jump to bounding. So she does like a big jump, and then she actually jumps with one leg and then goes into a bounding exercise. Bounding is one of my all-time favorite reactive power exercises, actually. if I were to show you that in socks right now, I think it would kill me. Exercise examples, depth jump, and then we'll do bounding. So I'm going to pull up a video instead. Take that, ad. Had you pre-muted. All right. I really want to just get straight
really
to
bangs, Mr. Triple Jump. Approach.
All right, so here's bounding, right? He's getting a sprint, and then like see how he's
Speed it up.
he's literally hopping from one exercise to the other. So the second he lands, he is transitioning and then sprint and then jumping into the next rep, right?
One of the problems that I find with a lot of triple jumpers, even those triple jumpers,
there's like a single leg version.
Bounce, attacking the ground, moving his arms and swing leg together.
So that's literally being as explosive as possible, right? That's really the big key here. And reactive power exercises are a great way to work on that explosive, like sprinting motion. So the second he touches the ground, his body experiences a ground reaction force. It knows that immediately has to recruit those muscles and spring it into the next repetition. So the way I like to keep power exercises in my head is it's like if I'm being forced from one rep into the next, that's a great example of a plyometric power. Now, why do you have to consider those things when you have a list in your book? Well, again, if we look at the quote unquote phase 6 here, right, this needs to be something that is sport specific. This guy in this video is training for like the triple jump. He's a track and field coach, right? That big bounding motion is a huge part of like his sport in particular. Is bounding really important for you as a boxer? Probably not. But like being able to like, you know, explosively move in one direction to another is. So maybe instead lateral movement, hopping side to side as explosively as possible, like an ice skater, would be something that's actually very important because it involves a lot of lateral movement. So when we're considering our plyometric exercises, if you are in plyometric power, which is obviously one of the most advanced things that you can do with somebody, you do want to make sure that you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. It should be very sport specific. So in the end, again, phase 1 is plyometric stabilization. Phases 2, 3, and 4, strength. Phase 5 and phase 6 are power. And that 6 stuff is the sport specific stuff. And that's about that. We're having people drop like flies today. But do you guys have any questions? Questions, comments, concerns?
You sure? That was good. That was good. So like basically when you say when you're doing the bounding is good to keep your upper body in motion, your arms to swing.
I wasn't saying that. The guy in the video was, but although I'd love to take credit for it. But yeah, no, you do want to continue with like your mechanics. Remember, like, I'm sure you've been over this, but like, you know, when your left leg comes up, your right arm is springing forward, right? You don't want to have that kind of weird, like Frankenstein walk where it's like same arm, same leg at the same time. You want to work in opposition. Because that opposition is what keeps your body like centered and reduces rotational movement. The whole point of this, you only have so much energy that you're spending, so you want to keep that energy traveling forward. You don't want it to go in either of those directions, right? I'm trying to spend it this way, so I want to make sure my energy is going that way. If that involves like a little bit of arm movement to keep me centered so that I don't randomly rotate, it's worth spending that energy.
So it's like very, very important to focus on contralateral linear movement, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it keeps you balanced.
Okay.
Yeah. That's not necessarily related to this, but that's like running stuff. I love talking about that. Take the apple out of your pocket. What's that, Raph?
I said I love the track stuff. I had an Olympic track coach, so she blessed me with some knowledge.
Yeah, dude, track and field is so much fun. Like does not get enough credit. You know, we think of sports, we think of like, you know, baseball, basketball, and football. But man, like the track stuff, like the coaching for it is so fun.
That's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, I love it. I
A
love it.
beautiful sport. Definitely. All
Absolutely.
the way around. Even the shot putters.
Yeah, I wish that I wish that I
Most people don't realize what it takes to do it, but it's
yeah, I wish that I had goofed around with that when I was younger. Cause I was like I had skinny arms, so I was like, I'm never gonna be a shot putter. So I like
Yeah.
stayed away. I wish
Those
I would
shot
learn more.
putters.
It's such a cool, like that motion. I didn't know I was gonna be interested in like movements when I got older, and now I'm like, oh, I wish I'd learned about the shot put. So,
They really mastered that ATP PC system.
oh yeah, dude, it's like
It's
boom,
crazy.
and then sport over. You know.
You're right.
Well, guys, I guess that's about it. We'll go ahead and end it up for today. I'll get everything up on Canvas. Homework 2 is going out today, so make sure you guys look for that. And I will reiterate what Jessica said in the email when I send it out today.
Okay, for sure.
All right,
Y'all
guys.
have a blessed day.
Thank you,
See you later,
Brad.
everybody.
Nice day, everyone.
Thanks.